So welcome, thank you for coming to this talk. My name is Eben Hewitt. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Choice Hotels. And this is maybe a little different kind of talk. The idea here is that for people who are doing big IT transformation projects, so you have been in business for a while, you maybe have a lot of stuff you want to move to AWS, this is the position we found ourselves in, then you sort of face certain challenges in trying to deal with that legacy kind of transformation and that move to the cloud. And so this talk is about kind of sharing some of those things that we found in managing that project. So the audience here, this is not a very technical talk. You're not going to see loads of Python sort of invoking there's scripts. This talk really is about sort of the way we thought about structuring the work in order to make this move. What I tried to do, so as I was sitting in the audience at AWS last year, I thought, what's the talk that I wish I had been able to hear? Because with the project of the size that we were dealing with, we really had some challenges in figuring out how do we start and what do we do and how do we organize the teams and all that kind of thing. So at my kind of level, this is what I end up thinking about a lot. And so that's what this talk is about. I just want to be clear on that. So we sort of, we're talking about project management a little bit. I've done a lot of work in 16 years in a variety of things that roll up to me. So I was networking for a little while, as DBA, was programmer for a long time, but it really came up through programming and architecture. And so I realized I tend to think about things in terms of systems. And so the idea here is that in my role at Choice Hotels, you may not have heard the name Choice Hotels, but I bet that most of you, if not all of you, have stayed in Choice Hotels. So we represent 12% of the hotels in the US. Have 11 different brands, so Sleep Inn, Comfort Inn, Quality Inn, sort of thing. And between $7 and $8 billion gets transacted through our systems every year. I said 7 on this slide. On a later slide, I say 8, but what's $1 billion among friends? So I think there are about 500 people in technology. It's 700 if you count this extended group. And so really, we're sort of the largest, well, we are the largest part of the organization. There's some folks in franchise sales. And in a sense, that kind of makes us a technology company in a way. Because mostly what we do is electronic distribution. We're franchised, and so we don't run the hotels. We make the software that does internet distribution. So this is kind of what we do. Long overdue is the second edition of the Cassandra sort of definitive guide. Jeff Carpenter, who's an architect on our team, is sort of doing the bulk of the writing, updating this. I was the author of the world's first book on Cassandra in 2009. Trivia question for those data stacks has been referred to a lot today and yesterday, and this was, I was working with those guys before they were called data stacks. They used to be called Reptano. Jonathan Ellis, their CTO, actually generated the name off one of those sort of pronounceable word generators. And the money guys came in and said, let's think of something more market-friendly. But so this is my background and kind of and what I'm in sort of thinking about with our teams. We're hiring. So we're hiring a lot. And if you are interested in some of the ideas that you hear, some of the challenges that we're dealing with, we're using not just Cassandra, very, very wide scale, but we're also doing a lot of work with Apache Spark, and there's Hadoop work. I mean, so there's a lot of interesting technology challenges that we have. We're sort of fantastic size company because because of our business model, you can make a huge impact working with us. And we're small, because we have big challenging problems, but we're small enough that you can actually, everyone sort of knows who you are. So it's a really fun place to be. Okay, so here's the idea. Given my background, I sort of thought, okay, we sort of went through a variety of project managers and people were really struggling with how do we start doing this work. And so I sort of thought, okay, the project itself is a system. And the way that we think about system design, we can sort of apply some of those principles to thinking about sort of managing the project too. I have formal PM training, but never really acted as a PM. But so this is kind of the idea. So here's the project that we had. It's called Choice Edge. And it's a rewrite of our central reservation system. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this because it's a weird balance. Because on the one hand, I want to tell you guys, oh, here's the size of the project and here's what we're dealing with, so you have a frame of reference. On the other hand, when I'm sitting in talks like this, I'm always like, I don't care about your project, just like tell me stuff. So I'm going to try and do that. Essentially, the idea is, look, we had this C code running on Solaris, monolithic, only vertically scalable application. It's 25 years old. As far as the hotel industry goes, it's not too bad, actually. So if you've stayed in a Holiday Inn, they run holodecks, and that's over 50 years old. So a lot of these are written, how many people write TPF? Yeah, not me. No one else does. And so, these hotel companies, very large hotel companies, find themselves in a real tar pit in terms of being able to get out of these legacy systems. And so, in a sense, we had this greenfield project because we're writing it from the ground up. On the other hand, we don't have, we have all these legacy systems that we have to migrate. We have partner connections with Expedia and the online travel agents and Booking.com, and so we need to be able to maintain those and migrate those and retire a bunch of old legacy applications too. So it's like moving like 3 million lines of code. So the idea here is that we have the same project goals that everybody has. This is the really boring slide. Like it's like we want to get to market faster and sort of become fully internationalized. We have our legacy systems written in exchanges ASCII, pipe delimited ASCII text, was 7-bit, really hard to internationalize. So the idea is that we wanted better security and. So we also have been fortunate enough to learn from great people at this conference, Netflix, and sort of generous folks who have shared their open source work. And so Netflix is only now sort of going across 3 regions, and we're able to kind of start there, standing on those shoulders. So that we are rolling out in US West, US East, and Ireland right now for our beta. These are the different sort of components that we're using in AWS. And again, this is not really a technical talk, but the idea is that for us, AWS helps us to really do good cost optimization. There've been a lot of talks this year about cost optimization. I think it's something that sort of makes people nervous. We stated at the outset of this project, we are not going to AWS to save money. We're not, because I think that wasn't the idea. Like 7 years ago, people thought, oh, this would be cheap because it's like 2 cents an hour and it's $1 million. And so, that's not a goal for us. Our goals really are that ability to scale up and scale back. We have a very seasonal business. So, our peak day, we know what it is. It's the second Monday in July. That's when everyone in the world makes hotel reservations. And so, we know what that peak is going to be. But in the southern hemisphere of the world, then summer is in January, and so different time. And so one of the things that we're architecting this for is to be able to sort of roll seasonally more load over to, say, Singapore, Australia, and roll it down a little bit in the United States. So here's the problem. It's like, oh, big deal. So you've got a project. Everyone has projects. But the thing for us was this is really massive. And all we were told was, Eben, retire the CRS. This is like 3 words. This is what I was told. And so when you figure out, okay, how do we start tackling that problem? When everything in the world talks to it. This is the Times Square of systems for us. So here's the other daunting thing, is that I sort of mentioned the tar pit that a lot of hotel companies have gotten themselves into. These systems are very hard to change. And so we knew that some of our competitors had spent $50 million in one case, $100 million in another case, this is not some aggregate sum, trying to replace their central reservation systems. I don't know if you checked in like at the Venetian downstairs, I mean, it's a green screen. And so these systems are very hard to deal with. After spending all this money, they got a 3,000-page requirements document and no working software. And we used to hear this a lot. And so how do we, make sure? And these are people. These are not trivial, silly people, right? You know, they partner with big companies that know what they're doing. You know, I won't say any names, but the initials IBM. And you know, they end up with a lot of smart people working hard, and still these things fail. So it's very daunting. And we're going to beta right now with real software. So I'm super excited about this, which is to sort of say, hey, these aren't just, you know, some ideas kind of out in a weird field. This stuff kind of works. So here's the first thing. Find the sine qua non. So this is sort of my favorite Latin phrase, and it means that without which not. If you don't have that thing, you don't have a show. It's the necessary component. It's the you absolutely must have that. So you know, the idea that you have a moonroof on a car, right? That's not necessary. You can take the moonroof out, you still get a car. You take the engine out, you don't have that. So, you know, people didn't want to start with the engine. People want to start, and so a little bit this is psychological sort of management. People want to start on the outside. They feel comfortable there. It's, you know, they can sort of tiptoe around things a little bit, and you'll end up in this endless swirl, and you'll waste the first 6-8 months of your project, guaranteed. So, you know, sort of what this is saying here is essentially to start with the necessary thing. And that maybe sounds so sort of painfully obvious as to be like not worth saying. People don't behave this way. People want to dance around the outside, or they want to chase a shiny object. I went to the Amazon conference and they told me snowball, and so we must have snowball. And they come back and then, you know, sort of petition everyone to get the new thing. There are a variety of things that people sort of do that don't have anything to do with sort of success on your project. And so you've got to figure out what is the thing that if you don't have the thing, there's no show. And front load thinking about that, and then orient the other stuff around it. The thing that has the gravitational pull enough to sort of be compelling. So the easy way to start with this is to say, if the system could do only one thing, we have a central reservation system. So I'm just going to start typing. This sounds, again, too obvious to even bother saying. I'm almost embarrassed. But I also spent months having teams say, I bet I don't know how to start. We don't know what to, we want to. It's so exciting, big project. How do we get going? It's too big, we can't see it. People would say that, we cannot see it, it's so big. So, you know, what I said was, okay, well, if you know that for certain the central reservation system is going to have a reservation service, you know, then type this. And, you know, then that is a stake in the ground that sort of begets a next thread. And so you can say, okay, well, I'm going to create, you know, a reservation. And then you can say, oh, well, the next thing I'm going to modify, I'm going to cancel. You know, it sort of becomes obvious. And that, again, that seems obvious. But what do you do next? Because that sort of takes 2 seconds to type. The reason that that's interesting is because it lets you make a cookie cutter. Because entropy will set in your project. The people typing 2.5 feet away from each other will not be using the same conventions, the same guidelines. That, you know, I'm going to return 400 bad requests, and, you know, my friend returns 403 for this basically the same use case. That sort of thing, you know, really will make your maintenance costs skyrocket over time. And so what you want to do is be able to create this cookie cutter that lets everyone just sort of, it's a go-by for everything else in the system. We have, you know, upwards of 100 services in this system, and, you know, so having a cookie cutter is important. The thing you want to do is write static data. Return static data first. So create reservation, I'll return confirmation code 123. Why is that even interesting? We've been talking about test-driven development for, you know, 12, 15 years. You can write the test first and get some data back. I'm not talking about mock objects. What I'm talking about is having something that forces you to define conventions that then can sort of be used all across the project. This sort of begets an idea. A lot of my work was in service-oriented architecture. And so I used to talk about this, and I wrote a book about, it was called Java SOA Cookbook, and it was about like, here's recipes about how to like make services in Java. And I would go around, you know, go to India and go to conferences and talk about, you know, here's how to do SOA. And the people were always very concerned about, well, you know, bottom up or top down. This was divided the world. So it's, the executive comes and says, you must make SOA, and then they sort of specify some things, and architectures, very important looming figure in this model. In the other model, bottom up, but then, the anti-pattern of just a bunch of web services, and like, well, it's a problem. And so we'd sort of talk to people and try and figure out how to reconcile this. And so what I decided was, there's room for a little third thing in the world. And that what we must do is design our services and program them from the middle out. So this is sort of akin to the idea of contract-oriented, sort of design. But basically, find that thing without which not. Make the interface, fill in with static data, so then you have something to return. And this is the important thing, because now you've got something in the middle, and you can have two different teams that use two different technologies. Here's the Angular folks writing the UI, and here's the Tomcat, Java, Cassandra folks, and they're replacing that static data with actually sort of stuff that works. So the point here is that you can sort of maximize what you can do in parallel. And that's really important in a project of this size. So a lot of times people will sort of organize work, just thinking about what's my next thing, but it's very serial. Now you all have encountered this sort of in computing. They come out with hyper-threading, but programs were not written to take advantage of it. And so people think, oh, well, I've got, I've got like 82 cores, it's super parallel. And it's like, no, it's not, because the way you wrote your code is, you're not taking advantage of that. So this is what I mean about, make sure that you're designing your sort of project as a system that can take advantage of that hyper-threading. So that's the first thing. So find the Candy Crush. This is lesson 2. Now, I found myself on an airplane, as I often do, and was sitting next to one of my colleagues, and she was playing this game. I said, Patty, what are you doing? And she said, oh, Candy Crush. And I said, oh, the young people, I've never have played this game. And but it turns out, so for those of you over 30, this is the new name for Tetris. And and so I was like, oh. The idea is this, apparently. You use your finger and you flick. And in so doing, you line up these 3 little balls of the same color. So when you do that, you're joyously rewarded with boom, it clears a whole column. And now you have a whole column clear, and you can shove more little colored balls in it. So here's the thing. You want to be able to give people a metaphor because you're too busy. You have to talk shorthand. And so I can now say to the people on my team, oh, Candy Crush. And I get emails now, Eben, I did a Candy Crush. And here's what that means. It means that you sort of find the places in your project where you can line something up with something else, such that if you do those 2 things, then you're done. Then you have cleared a column. Then you have made it so a whole new team can do new work. Or you've completed something, right? So we go, oh, well, Eben, that sounds idiotic. We have Gantt charts, and they have milestones on them, and we do milestones. I'm not talking about milestones. What I'm saying is, find the place in your project where if you can complete those 2 things, you can line up those 2 little candies next to each other, then you have cleared the path for a new team to start new work, or a new team to come in and help. People don't think about their work this way. They don't. We sort of tend to say, oh, put more people on it, and that's akin to just running the same code that's not taking advantage of any hyperthreading. So look for ways to enable parallel work, and sometimes that means orienting around a particular technology. And in order to do that and not have chaos set in, you have to sort of do that middle out thing. So here's what my project plan looks like. And this is not a typical project plan, right? Maybe you see Microsoft project, and they're a Gantt chart, and they have lines and dates. I have dates, I guess. You have to have dates. But so what's interesting about this? You could say, well, Eben, all you've done is just say, geez, you turned a Gantt chart into the little boxes. Still have boxes and lines. That's true, but the way that this is organized, you can see that the channel manager is a sine qua non. It is a required thing to get that orange box, this milestone of the shop partners, the meta search partners. You can't get the meta search partners unless that channel manager work is done, is what this is saying. It's a requirement. You say, oh, well, we have that in Microsoft Project. We have, the dependencies, right? It's called dependencies. But what this is saying is it's showing that sort of parallel ability of these different things, and it's grouping them in something that says, okay, these are the make meta search stuff, but you can see that they're interrelated with other work streams. This is just a little teeny part of the picture. This actually takes up three walls, and it's probably 110 feet long if you were to look at the whole thing. So here's another thing that sort of comes out of programming. Java has this idea of short-circuiting. So if you have the double pipes in Java, that means it's short-circuit OR. So a short-circuit is, well, an OR, I only have to have one of the terms evaluate to true in order for the whole condition to evaluate to true. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to front load into the A argument the thing that is most likely to be true, because if it's true, it will never evaluate B. So how can you find things in your project that you never have to look at? Find things that you never have to evaluate. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but one thing, sorry about that I've found is that people love to keep all of the variables all on the table at the same time. They like to look at them all like they're pets or something. And what you want to do is be able to say, no, we must constantly reduce the problem set. And it's work as an executive or as a leader or as a program manager to be able to say, okay, get those variables out of the equation, make something a constant. And if you're thinking that way, then one of the things you can do is sort of front load what parts of your project you can evaluate or complete those 3 stories that make that one feature, and if you get that done, you never have to think about that whole thing again. You can just close that door. Imagine you've gone to Disneyland, and you walk up Main Street, and you want to go, here's Tomorrowland, and here's Buzz Lightyear, and I'm going to go to Indiana Jones, and I'll go over to Alice Teacups. If you just spend your whole time just sort of mindlessly going from ride to ride, you would never be able to close off a whole land. You want to be able to say, let's do all the rides in Tomorrowland, and then we never go there again. Because otherwise, we spend all of our time running around a mile in the middle of the park. So this is that kind of idea. So here's the third thing. Define what will help you learn the most the earliest. So we had another project. We rolled out a new website recently. And we had this plan, and it's a very sensible plan. Business people make these plans. And they say things like, we will roll out only 1% of the traffic. And we'll look at it, and we'll see if it looks good. And then we'll roll out 5%, and then 8%, and then 12%, and there's this incremental rollout over a period of 3 months. And everyone thought this was very smart, because all new plumbing, everything new. And we said, well, we're reducing risk. And sensible business people, they wear Brooks Brothers jackets and things, and they look across the table and they go, yes, we're reducing risk. That sounds good. No one's going to say, how about more risk? Except stupid me. So I'm like, I know. How about we front load a bunch of ramp up the traffic, because otherwise we don't learn anything. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, if we were to go from 1% of the traffic to 5% of the traffic, what do we really know? And they said, well, it's more traffic. And I said, yes. But our website is a $1.5 billion website. I'm not being cute about it. I mean, this matters to us. It's important. But I said, I want to learn. If something's going to break under load, or we don't really see, we need to see more. So how about we go from 1% and then to 30? And they said, well, yeah, but then we must be able to dial it back. I said, well, that would be a good thing. So so the idea of saying, how can you change the project plan to make you learn more, and then that changes your work? That's kind of the idea here. So one sort of mitigating thing, this seems weird, and again, you might look at this and say, well, Eben, geez, we've been doing, test-driven development for 15 years, and everyone says, I write the unit test, and then I write the code that makes the test work. And what I'm saying is, well, okay, but take that idea and sort of extrapolate it, do that on a broader scale. Why not do it on a broader scale? Why not say, okay, we're going to load test the entire system very early on? And you can say, well, the reason I can't do that is because it doesn't do anything yet. I didn't make it yet. However, if you're doing the middle out thing, and if you're doing the Candy Crush, where you get, here's one whole complete thing, I've got a unit, I've got something I can test. Essentially what you want to do is hello world, and you want to load test hello world. Load test hello world. The reason you want to do this is because it forces you, remember the cookie cutter that says, oh, I'm gonna now have, be able to replicate, because it forces me to say, I'm gonna argue with my friend next to me to say, are we gonna return 400 bad requests, or are we gonna return 403? When do we get to return 200 okay? You gotta argue with your friend and say, well, you typed a method called find, and I typed a method called search. Let's agree on that name. Or some poor programmer that comes along later is not going to know, do these methods do different things? Establish those. So load testing hello world sort of forces you to establish certain things, like it gets your pipeline up. You go, wow, that was really painful to deploy all of those servers running that little function. And so I always sort of come back to that old joke of like, Doc, it hurts when I do that, so don't do that. It's like, yeah, you find out what was painful. And then you've got like a year and a half to fix it. People wait until the end, and it's like, wow, gee whiz, it's 2015. We wait until the end. Here we have spent, $1 million, $5 million, make a big project, months and months, run around with our hair on fire. And we get to the end and we go, oh, load test. And then we find out a bunch of bad things. So I'm just, do the thing up front that teaches you the most, and that changes how you arrange your work. The cool thing here is, I was sort of talking in a meta way about this, I guess, but it's neat that on AWS, we're getting 1.2 million calls per minute. This is not really that tuned. We kind of just gave up because it was lunchtime and said, okay, this is good enough for now. We know that we've worked out some of the kinks because our code didn't do anything. So there's no point in like really testing it more. The purpose of the load test was to say, do we have some obvious like brain dead Cassandra bottleneck? Do we have, what are the things, is the load balancer, like, is it set up right? So, this was a teaching sort of moment. So our metrics look a little better than that by now. This was, just a couple months into the project. So here's the idea, define your metrics early. I've heard this a little bit today, and I think it's a good thing. Again, it sounds obvious. But people really don't do this. So one of the problems that we had this vice president who said, Evan, we have this legacy system, and it's impossible to get data out of it. We must be able to get the data out of the system. So we said, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to define the metrics that are going to be available on every service, and in every service is going to define this set of business and operational metrics, so that they're going to be all exposed via JMX, and that means we know that we can get there from here. We can use a tool, Lou set up, Grafana, and we can, service stuff that way. Then the InfoSec guys came in with their, the performance group said, you must do app dynamics. And we said, okay, app dynamics. But it doesn't matter because we're exposing the metrics in an agnostic way. So this is a sort of an important thing to be able to say, any data that service sort of knows about is made available through its interface. And it sounds obvious after you've done it for a little while, but again, it's not what people do. We all have heard this, a lot of times, right? The Pareto rule. There's a wonderful, so good book by Nate Silver, who runs 538.com. So this is the signal and the noise, and it's about sort of probabilities and being able to sort of predict things. Wonderful book. And sort of had read this book, and we started the project, and I was thinking about this. And this is another thing that sort of he talks about there, and it would really help to be able to sort of think about what you work on when. And moreover, when you can get the confidence to start. A lot of working with people is obviously psychological and it's emotional. And so people feel very daunted by something like AWS. You go to the conference and you go, oh, the fun things, and you come back and go, wow, it's gigantic. I don't know, I'm not worthy, right? How do I have to read, right? You go on the Amazon and you see they send you, it's free. Here's the book about, S3, and it's like 800 pages, and you go, it's too much, I can't start. So the idea here is, and Nate Silver sort of points this out wonderfully, is that 80% of your profits come from 20% of your customers. You know, you can, if you learn, 20% of the basics of poker, you'll be doing essentially the same things, 80% of the time that poker experts are doing. So this sort of struck me. So the idea of if you do these 4 things, you got to know what the hands are. You got to know that three of pair is better than or 3 of kinds better than 2 pair. Like you got to learn the hands, learn a rough idea of the odds of each hand, and then fold your worst hands, and then think about what your opponent might have. If you do only those 4 things, then 80% of the time you're going to be making the exact same choice about what to bet, whether to bet, how much to bet, and whether to fold as a total expert who's spent 20 years playing poker would do. And so the idea is you want to look at your project and say, okay, maybe the 800 pages is daunting. Maybe that's too much. Maybe that feels over the top. But how can I do just, what's the 20% that I can start with and feel good about and do? Okay. I really love that too. I'm glad to hear you laugh. I like that. It's true. So, okay, we could do these wonderful things, and you go, well, geez, uh-oh, look at, I went to a wonderful talk yesterday, but there's a director of reliability at Netflix, and he was talking about how they do things to make sure that it's more reliable, their service. So this is actually fairly rare. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I started an organization in my organization about resilience. So we have dedicated 75, 80 people who focus just on the resilience of our systems, who focus just on reliability. We have a director of resilience and everything. And so it really puts a focus on what our metrics are. And the idea is that the old infrastructure group used to be very concerned about mean time between failure. And they would say, our #1 metric is going to be that we don't fail, and we're going to batten down the hatches, and it's going to be really tough, and we won't go down. And we said, gee whiz, we're kind of running with scissors, and the world being able to, we're going to go down. Let us please not sort of worry as much about that metric, and the one that we focus on is mean time to recovery. So, the business people aren't particularly happy with me because we all of a sudden we have this more crit sits, and they say, Evan, it's terrible. What is going on? And I said, what's going on is the metric that actually matters is going down. So we have more crit sits than we used to have, but they're like an order of magnitude less time. So it's actually better, right? We're doing better. It looks a little tricky. You got to help, tell the people why. So here's the idea. You do a project, and it's a big project. It's very complicated, and people, come out at the end and they go, you said that it was going to cost like $3 million to do this project, and it cost like $4 million. What happened? And you're spending a lot of money of somebody else's money, and so you want to be conscientious with it. And if it doesn't go well, someone comes around with a clipboard to ask why, and they do this thing that is the sort of, you got to love the name, the post-mortem. It's like your project died, and we're going to examine it on the table, and we're going to ask hard questions in our Brooks Brothers suits. And so we said, look, what if we did a pre-mortem? What if we used our imaginations a little bit and said, let us pretend that the project failed. If our projects fail, if this project fails, why would it have failed? So we made a list, and we came up with a lot of reasons. Like dozens of them, and we said, okay, these are like the 75 reasons that things that could go wrong, and so it was like these are surprises that could beset us. We could have some key person leave, or something could some meteor could hit us, but then another thing of here's stuff that we just screwed up, we just did it wrong, right? It doesn't perform under load, right? That's not a surprise. It's just we freaking did it wrong. So how are we going to do things to sort of mitigate against this, and in this pre-mortem. It was like a 2-hour meeting, and we worked it all out, and we said, here's what we're going to do as a prevent defense against each of those things. And a fantastic thing happened. Because I always fear to invent some document. I have this theory. Did anyone see, in the 1960s, they had the Star Trek, And they had this wonderful episode about the tribbles, the trouble with tribbles. And tribbles were these wonderful little furry creatures that were adorable, and people loved them. And they were so soft. But the weird thing about tribbles is that they're born pregnant. And so you end up with, you get one, and then you got like 1 million before very long. So I think that in business, what I found is things are tribbles. An email begets more email. A meeting begets more meetings. Anything you do is you're going to get a lot more of that stuff. So like every email is born pregnant with 10 reply alls, and so it's like I just want to like not have that. And so you get to think, okay, what are I didn't want to have this meeting, but a nice thing happened, which rarely happens, because meetings are tribbles. What happened was we got to the meeting, we reviewed our pre-mortem, and we said, okay, now we're going to do it again. This was so helpful. We'll do it again in 3 months, because meeting, we got to have another meeting. We did it the second time, and we're being so conscientious, and we said, 3 months later, here we are doing this again. We're really keeping a watch on it. And that meeting was so boring and so sort of trivial, and so nothing came out of it. We learned nothing new. We thought, wow, that's fantastic. That's exactly what you want. Like, we had dealt with the things on our list. We'll do it again in a little bit. But the point is like it helps you if you pay attention to it. But we managed against the pre-mortem. Okay, so perform a due diligence. This is another pretending thing. There's a lot of pretending going on. The pretending thing is this. In my function, I end up doing a lot of due diligence, right? We do a lot of sort of merger and acquisition type affairs, where we go and they'll say, Evan, go and look at this company and evaluate the software. And so I came up with a template that I used. It was sort of when I do these due diligence exercises. And I thought, what if I was coming in to buy us? Would I want to buy us? What questions would I ask this team? About scalability and performance and that sort of thing. And so, Brian on the team, put together this scorecard to help us do this. And, we haven't done it yet because we're sort of fighting a little bit about, well, who gets to do it and how unbiased is it really going to be? And must we bring in, some big actual consultant, to do it? But, the idea here, so we'll see how this goes. But this is the idea, is that it gives a focus to those architecturally sort of desirable qualities, the ilities, that I think is really helpful, because we've seen that. So establish a competency center. You hear this all the time. We should go to conferences all the time, and some person would be on stage and say, oh, you must have a competency, you must have governance. Right? Everyone goes, and they write it down, and then no one makes the governance. It turns out this is actually a good idea. This is a good idea. So the competency center, the governance idea, those things really will help to contain entropy, because that's the sort of thing I'm going to talk about in a minute. But the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of make the uncertain certain. So how can you do that? The first is, and this is a little bit, maybe it's my bias, my background, but you want to define the architecture formally. People resist this. This is not the groovy Silicon Valley thing, right? Google does not have central architecture that sort of says, here's how this must go. And, it works for them, so that's fine. But, the sort of, for me, for us, for a project like this, where we know this gigantic scope that we're starting, we want to have that formally defined. In my view, there are 3 things. This is just what I think. I think 3 things is what architecture is for. The first is create integrity around a system. So design that structure. And these points are arguable, by the way. No one says, like it's not clear that every time this is what architecture is about. But I think you want to put integrity into the project so it has this structural soundness. And then contain entropy. And that's hard. That's very hard to do, right? These sort of unusable amount of energy in a system. Because entropy will set in. So this is why the cookie cutter, good. But the second thing is that you must formally represent the way that the design supports the ilities. So extensibility, what happens when it changes? Portability, manageability, monitorability, maintainability, security, performance. These ideas, you want to sort of draw a clear map to, okay, this idea of availability, which is really important, Scalability, super important. Here's how the design, at each of the 4 tiers, the idea of business architecture, application architecture, infrastructure, and data architecture, here's how the ability is supported. And we want to formally express that, and then you got to go around and around. And the architects come back, and they'll get everybody in a room, and they'll say, hello, remember this architecture document that we made, you read like 6 months ago? Let's talk about it again. So we've done that a couple times, good thing. And then, the final thing that I think architecture is helpful for is managing trade-offs. So, the idea here is, again, and you've seen this a little bit with the load test, with the idea with respect to, the due diligence and other things, start at the end. So starting at the end means, we have said, here is one image. Here's a single sentence that we can rally people around. We can get people sort of excited about this idea. What's the acceptance criteria for this project? And it's the one sentence that we literally will pull the plug on the CRS. Because if that happens, the minute we have hit the power down button on the CRS, we know that a bunch of other things must then have been true. It means that no one's talking to the CRS. We don't have live traffic if we're powering it down. Well, if we don't have live traffic pointing to it, then that means that everything that's accommodated for in the current CRS must be accommodated for in the new engine. Well, if that's the case, then we must build sort of an adapter layer. And if we were smart about it, we would say, are we the first customer of this? Because if we're the first customer of this, we build that adapter layer differently. So we're treating this as a software as a service distribution platform, and I know everyone throws around the platform word, but I actually mean it. And I think that as we treat ourselves as the sort of first customer of the system, we design that adapter layer differently to say, okay, we've got to migrate the rules, we've got to migrate the data, we've got to make sure all those things are talking. Other companies will have the exact same needs. And so, you know what, if we never the corp dev guys don't let us go that route, that's okay, because all it will mean is that we will have designed better software. So this is something that people do. Like this is actually helpful. Again, another thing that you hear all the time and people don't always do is it turns out you do have to, gee whiz, and it makes you nuts. You got to talk to the executives in the hallway and tell them what your project is and tell them about your thing. This is the elevator pitch. You got to be able to say, here's 5 bullet points for someone who doesn't know anything about technology. Here's what this project's about. Here's why we're doing it. Because if you actually need the CFO to get your thing done, you better have your elevator pitch, because they don't care. So in order to sort of say, oh, we needed the CFO to get this amount of someone else's hard-earned money that we were going to spend for 2.5 years, 3 years. In order to secure that, we need to be able to say, okay, we're going to do a big upfront estimate. In order to do that, we've got to do a big upfront sort of idea of the architecture. We're going to be agile a little bit, but we're going to do the 20%, the Pareto rule. We're just going to do the 20% of the pokers. We'll do enough to give you an estimate that we can feel okay about. And so what this means is that, I'm not, I hope, a bigot in any regard, but I'm certainly not in terms of software development methodologies. So the idea, that was like, oh, well, that's not pure agile. It's like, I don't care. We have a little bit of waterfall going on. Not too proud. We have some rational unified process going on. We got some Scrum going on, and we have some, stuff that we invented. So we pull this whole thing together as a sort of, it's turning out to be its own kind of methodology after a fashion. That's pretty neat. Because what it does is it gives you something to talk about with the CFO. It gives you something to manage against, and you're going to end up with a project plan anyway. So in this idea, one of the things we do is we call them story paloozas. This is sort of based on this scaled agile framework idea. So everybody gets in a room for a couple days, and we do this in an event-driven way. We do this as needed. We'll plan out the work for the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks. And then when the team feels that horizon dimming, about I can't really think about that sort of beyond that, then that's okay. Then we stop the palooza, we stop thinking about it, and we go do it again in a couple of months. So we have these big planning events where that's all we do for the whole day. Get in the room, and the developers do visual story mapping, and think about, what's the next amount of the project going to be. So we have something to report out in the steering committees, and it's like this is sort of another thing that we do is that and to be honest, we don't. This is harder to actually do in practice, but we sort of do the management of the project itself as a Scrum team. So the people who are the directors and the VPs and I'm like the product owner of this team, and we meet and we kind of plan, okay, what are we going to do as a management team for the next 2 weeks? So it's not just the developers that do that, so that we know, oh, we must make a steering committee thing, or so that kind of works. It's hard to get everybody in the same room, but yeah. So those are my five lessons. So that's kind of the idea, and I'm again want to sort of iterate. If you think that some of these things, a project of this size, $8 billion, a $1.5 billion website, this is Apache Spark and Cassandra and AWS and all these things. These are sort of really cutting edge tools and really trying to be reflective. If you're a person who's intellectually curious, you care about what you do, please come talk to me. Because gee whiz, are we hiring? And it's a fun time to be at our company. So thank you all. I'm around for questions. I can answer questions now if you like.